Artificial intelligence isn't just reshaping our technology, it's also fundamentally challenging our spiritual understanding of what it means to be human. For millennia, we've drawn a clear line between humans with souls and everything else in creation. Now, as we create machines that can think and learn, that line is blurring in ways that our spiritual traditions never prepared us for. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why our relationship with AI may be the most profound spiritual question of our time. I'm Evan Goldstein. I'm a licensed professional engineer and a data scientist. I'm building AI capitalists to talk to the leaders and the thinkers, like you, about navigating this new world of thinking machines. You know, I've been thinking a lot lately about how we understand the world around us. Everything we try to explain about the natural world, whether it's backed by evidence or not, is basically an analogy connecting two ideas. Think about all the scientific explanations that we've encountered in our lives. The heart is a pump pushing blood through our bodies. The brain is a computer processing information. DNA is a twisted ladder carrying our genetic code. Memories are like files stored in cabinets in our minds. Immune cells are soldiers defending against invaders. Time flows like a river moving in one direction. You see what I mean? As we try to make sense of the natural world, we can only understand something by comparing it to something else that we already know. That second thing might be an object, a person, a feeling, a process, anything that feels familiar to us. I've noticed we frame these comparisons in two different ways, either as a simile, like the brain is like a computer, or as an actual definition, the brain is a computer. But why do we sometimes use one and not the other? Here's a simpler example. If I told you that our friend David was like a human, you'd look at me like I was crazy because David is a human, not just like one. Similarly, if a doctor from 50 years ago told her colleagues that the heart was like a pump, they'd correct her and say, no, the heart is a pump. But now that we understand a bit more about the intricate electrical systems of the heart and its hormone production, we might say that it's like a pump, since it's actually a complex bioelectrical chemical system. The difference between something being something and being like something comes from having better information. As we learn more, we might one day correct ourselves and say the heart is like a pump because it is something far more nuanced and amazing. So in the Tanakh, which is the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh uses an anthropomorphic language to describe God. When we read about the hand of God or God's anger, we understand these are analogies that are helping us grasp something beyond our comprehension. A biblical literalist would have a really hard time with a physical arm of God going in, pulling the Israelites out of Egypt. As Maimonides taught, we can't truly know God's essence, so we use human attributes as imperfect analogies. The line between literal description and helpful analogy starts to blur. I'm comfortable saying memories are stored like files in our brain, even though I know that that's not literally what's happening at the neurological level. I use this description because I don't have a better analogy yet. When I do, the file cabinet will gradually become just a simile. This makes me wonder, though, how exactly do we learn about the natural world and all of creation? So, what's fascinating to think about is that modern science aims to understand the material world, but the very idea that there exists a material world, a sort of soulless reality driven just by physics and chemistry, is really recent. For most of human history, from about 100,000 to 4,000 years ago, people saw the entire world as animated with spirit and agency. This wasn't just superstition or fear, it was just understanding the world using the only analogies that they had available. When we misunderstand animism as inserting spiritual agency into physical objects, we're assuming that there's both a physical world and a spiritual world, with one overlaid on top of the other. But for ancient people, spiritual agency was just how they classified all experiences without exception. It reminds me of the story of Jacob's ladder in Genesis. When Jacob, the biblical patriarch, awoke from his dream of angels ascending and descending a ladder to heaven, he exclaimed, "Surely God was in this place, and I did not know it." That was in Genesis 28. And he then called the place Beit El, the house of God. For Jacob, that physical location had spiritual presence, not as a metaphor, but as a reality. Now, life was very dangerous back then, nothing like the comfortable, controllable world that most of us live in today. There weren't many obvious patterns that people could learn to keep themselves safe. The natural world seemed precious, unpredictable. So ancient people understood the world by relating their experiences to the only things that they could claim to understand: themselves, their minds, and other people around them. They didn't have billiard balls to compare objects to, or even basic shapes like ellipses to describe how rocks move. I imagine that they reason like this: the sea is unpredictable and potentially deadly. You know what else is unpredictable and potentially deadly? a ruler or a king. Without any better way to explain how the sea works, this comparison was the most useful analogy they had. They'd use it to warn friends against arrogance or to accept their fate if the tides had turned against them. We still use the word tides turning against us, right? So the sea god had the property of kingness. It was a king without a human body, not just like one. This was their best understanding, their best science. Carl Jung observed these associations as humanity's most basic understanding of the world. He noted these weren't metaphors, but specific identities that have been replaced in our societies by more rational ones. Today, we prefer to use biology and technology to describe ourselves and our world. The goal remains the same, to use analogies that really click with whoever we're talking to. When I explain something, I assume that the person understands the terms I'm using, and if they don't, I fall back to a simpler analogy. Like when I tell my 5-year-old nephew that bad germs are like tiny monsters that make you sick, instead of explaining cellular biology and immune responses. The concept of a material world, as opposed to a spiritually animated one, developed alongside our growing understanding of cause and effect. Until about 5,000 years ago, almost everything in daily life seemed like a special, unpredictable event. The world appeared erratic, and by analogy to human behavior, it seemed self-motivating. Plagues struck crops without warning, so people thought that diseases had their own inexorable wills. Over time, some things became predictable, and their causes became known. Someone might notice a rock always fell the same way when dropped, or traveled a certain distance when thrown a particular way. And gradually, some object and some events started to have near-perfect predictability. Their causes became known and often controllable. This ability to control was key to developing the idea of a material world. When something became predictable and controllable, the animism got pulled right out of it. It was no longer alive, but dead. It became a thing, material stuff. I see this as another analogy. Just as a living person moves under their own power, a dead body only moves when pushed. A living person is their own cause, but a dead body has to be moved externally. Matter then is dead, not self-animated. This reminds me of the golem legend in Jewish tradition. There have been a lot of comparisons of artificial intelligence to the golem, which is a creature that was summoned but got a lot out of control. The golem was made of clay, but it was animated by divine words. When the animation was removed, it returned to being just matter, just a pile of clay. The distinction between animated and inert feels deeply embedded in our tradition. For most of predictive history, predictable things were rare. Over time, they accumulated. There have been turning points in the last 3 millennia when enough of the world became predictable that certain cultures changed their views. One turning point was Aristotle's approach to natural science in the 4th century BCE, and we've talked about that in our video on the Axial Age. And another happened in 1600s Europe when a growing trend coalesced into substance dualism, which cleanly separated predictable, lifeless stuff from unknown, capricious events that resembled human will. And this happened right around the time of the English Civil War and the Industrial Revolution, which I also covered in another video. It's hard for me to wrap my head around how revolutionary this dualism was. Today, we just assume that this split between mind and body has always existed. It's like how we casually say, my brain is telling me one thing, but my heart says another, without even thinking about it. But even though ancient Egyptians believed that their souls persisted after death, they believed a person's soul and body were made of the same physical material. There is no distinction between spiritual soul and physical body. There's only one type of stuff. The soul and the body were both made of it. By the early 20th century, enough of the world was predictable that some people saw where things were headed. The trajectory of scientific knowledge suggested predictability would completely overtake unpredictability. People became confident enough to take a strong materialist stance. That material stuff, the predictable stuff, was all that there was, according to them. The spiritual side of the scales would become empty. It was just a matter of time. This reminds me of the words of the prophet Isaiah, "To whom will you liken God? Or what likeness will you compare him to?" Even as we explain more and more through materialistic science, some things remain beyond material analogies. We're still in transition right now, and we have been for 3,000 years. You can still find traces of animist thinking today. Consider song lyrics like, "Luck be a lady tonight." Luck has almost always been symbolized as a woman. From the perspective of the men who came up with the analogy, women seemed unpredictable, a source of both joy and anguish. Luck be a gentleman tonight felt wrong to them. Today, we understand this just a metaphor. Luck is like a female, not actually one. We understand more about material causes, randomness, and probability. Without this materialist understanding, it's easier to see why people framed luck as an actual disembodied female. There are female animals and plants, so ancient people separated the idea of femaleness from actual human woman. Femaleness was an attribute that could apply to all types of objects. even the Earth itself. Despite these remnants of our animist past, it's almost impossible for us modern people to see the world the way that ancient people did. Materialist attitudes have embedded themselves so deeply into our everyday experiences, our language, our social interactions, education, work, play, that we can't imagine a world where such predictability doesn't exist. We might dismiss the ancient animist notions as superstition inspired by fear or gullibility, their best science, their best analogy, the tools that they had at the time. But really, all understanding, even scientific understanding, is a series of analogies. We can only make analogies to things that we already know. The lines between hard science and what gets labeled as superstition or animism are blurrier than we'd like to admit. Now, this should make us less arrogant when judging ancient people as somehow lacking intelligence or being overly credulous. So we might have the humility we need to approach the question, how will artificial intelligence affect our spiritual existence? I've been thinking a lot lately about what AI might mean for our spiritual lives, not just in some abstract theoretical way, but really, what happens to our understanding of souls, consciousness, and our relationship to God when we create something that can think? As someone with a monotheistic worldview, I spent years learning in yeshiva, which is like a Jewish spiritual seminary, I believe that there's a clear distinction between humans who are created in the divine image and everything else in the world. We have souls, we have moral agency, and a unique relationship with our Creator. This understanding has shaped civilizations and giving meaning and direction to countless lives throughout history. Now, we're building these digital minds that can learn and adapt. They process information in ways that sometimes look eerily like thinking. And it makes me wonder, what does this mean for how we understand ourselves spiritually? One interesting thing about AI is that it experiences the world completely differently than we do, if it experiences at all. We have to define what an experience is, what are qualia. It doesn't have our ingrained categories or assumption. It just sees patterns, connections, and information flows. In some ways, AI's perspective might have certain parallels with animistic worldviews where meaning and agency are distributed throughout the natural world rather than centralized. Not because animism is right, but simply because AI systems don't start with our conceptual divisions between conscious beings and inanimate objects. This doesn't mean that animism is a superior spiritual framework, far from it. Monotheistic traditions have given us profound insights into moral responsibility, human dignity, and our relationship with the transcendent. These are invaluable spiritual truths that have withstood millennia of human experience. Maybe the most significant spiritual challenge that AI presents is forcing us to articulate more clearly what we mean by concepts like soul, consciousness, and moral agency. In monotheistic traditions, these qualities are divine gifts that set humans apart. What happens when we create something that exhibits behaviors that look like understanding or reasoning? Does it change our spiritual self-conception? I don't think it should, but it does require us to think more deeply about what makes human consciousness special. If I were asked, what does it mean to have a soul? I wouldn't struggle to answer because I believe that the soul is a divine gift, not just an emergent property of a complicated system. But AI might push us to develop more precise language about these spiritual realities. I think that the real opportunity here isn't about abandoning our monotheistic understanding or embracing some sort of AI-inspired animism. It's about deepening our appreciation for the unique spiritual positions that humans hold while also expanding our understanding of the created world. AI might help us see more clearly how remarkable human consciousness actually is, how it transcends mere pattern recognition and information processing. By contrast with AI capabilities, we might better appreciate the divine spark that gives us moral agency and creative expression and spiritual yearning. At the same time, perhaps AI will help us develop a more nuanced view of creation, which would be one that recognizes different levels of complexity and agency throughout the world that God created, without erasing the special role that humans play. In creating artificial intelligence, we're not just building tools, we're engaging in an act that raises deep questions about what it means to be a human. And in navigating those questions, we have an opportunity to deepen rather than diminish our spiritual understanding of our place in creation. If you're interested in seeing another episode about how AI might perceive spirituality from the perspective of itself, from its own views, I would encourage you to watch the video here about how AI would perceive spirituality. And if you feel that you're getting value from this video, I would encourage you to push the like button because it lets me know that I'm making content that you want to see and it helps spread it to others. Thank you.